Great, thanks for having me, and thanks for coming on a Friday in the summer. So I'd like to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. This is some recent work. One, you'll see that there's kind of two parts to the paper, but they both involve the body and interaction in real space with studies that we conducted in the wild. You'll see the latter half of the talk will have published work, and then the first half will have some unpublished work. So I welcome any questions, and I'll give you as much information as possible, but I don't include all the details from the paper, and actually this is helpful for me. I get input from you, and we can refine the camera-ready version. The talk is, I wanted to focus on the body and look at new interfaces for games and play in the real world. Not just games, but this idea of play and using technology for play. We use technology to stage the body in space and to form the way that we navigate space, the way we interact with each other, and the way we interact with technology. We can consider sometimes we have interfaces that require drastic changes to the way that we move around in space or communicate with each other. If you see the top image here, that looks normal now. We walk around with our phones, and we're kind of tuning out the rest of the world, and we focus on only what we care about. Then we can consider, well, should we always have these drastic changes? Do we want to remove that from, do we want to force them to do something else? Or how can we maybe encourage through the interface some way that they might interact with the world in a different way? Richard Coyne he published a book where he used the metaphor of tuning an instrument. So he suggested that perhaps with ubiquitous media, we don't necessarily need to make drastic changes, but maybe some small changes are bringing the world into a different harmony. So perhaps we cause new ways to interact with each other, but not necessarily through drastic changes. The bottom image, that's also a normal situation. So in the hospital, when you have blood taken, it's kind of scary. You see all the equipment there, and they approach. The technicians approach the arm, and they use the equipment that is the patient doesn't understand what is happening. They're kind of they have a lot of fear involved. So we're dealing with these two kind of scenarios in these two bits of research that I'll talk about. Something to note here is that the weird person here is you might think that everyone is rather normal, but the person in the very middle, the woman standing there, as a normal person might 20 years ago, she's kind of the weird person. Why is she standing there staring at somebody? Or why is she, that's kind of a strange artifact to the way that we live our lives now. We can think of technology also in terms of fashion. So fashion does this tuning, I would say. When we wear a suit that holds our body in a certain position, it kind of encourages certain body position, body posture. And you can have an open body posture, and apparently that helps to stimulate this, not necessarily aggression, but confidence and the ability to communicate with others. Female fashion for sure has been doing this for quite a long time as well, positioning the body in a way that perhaps exudes confidence, or perhaps is provocative or attractive in various ways. So we might think of technology in those terms as well. So are we kind of fashion designers in the sense? Are we kind of able to tweak the world around us, or tweak the user with technology that might be attractive to them, that they would like to use? So the first bit of research I'll show you, we have a paper that we'll be presenting at Kai Play. I'll present that in Amsterdam, and it's basically using phones in a different way, forcing the user to not just focus on the small screen, but actually use them to focus the attention away from the screen into the world and to the others around them. So we designed a game, and as you can see from the diagram there, we have the user point the phone down at the ground, and we use the glow from the screen to allow them to navigate. So we're using this low resolution light display, and then we studied the way that they orient to each other and to the game elements, and then we made some statements about the theory involved with technology and proxemics. So I'll say a little more about proxemics in a little bit. As you can see from this image, so this, when you hold the phone down, it turns on the glow from the screen. So pretty low tech solution, but if the user then turns the screen back over, it turns off, so it becomes black. So they have to play the game by turning it over. They buy into the system, and by doing that, they can then have this experience of wayfinding in the forest at night. And so we made some small choices that force collaboration or force investigation in the game. The pictures are probably, this is one of the challenges of this kind of a study. We did all of this in a public forest at night. With the cameras, we turned up the ISO extremely high, so this photo, even though it looks pretty dark on your screen, it doesn't capture the richness of the real world. Our eyes can adjust very well to dark environments. But basically, the user can see quite clearly a very bright area in front of them. And then we adjust the glow level, and then in another version of the game, they turn the phone over, and we use the flashlight from the camera, and we use that in pulses, and we use the pulses to navigate. So we see some other snapshots from the game. So we wanted to make it location specific. So we use the natural environmental features. We use the, as you can see on the top left, there's a vista to the city. So we knew that there might be some kind of game element that would happen there because it would be easy to direct them to that location, and it would also be kind of a fun payoff. They get the payoff from the interface, but also from the unique view. You can see in the middle, we have some elements of the game where they focus on their screen, so a palette of colors, very large, one bit, one single pixel, but they can modify the color by rotating the phone. Then we have on the top right, we have an experience where they need to use the flashlights, and we force collaboration where they need to shine the flashlights at different sensors at the same time, and it unlocks the game. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's hard to capture the reality. This image on the bottom left, this is with ISO cranked up extremely high, so it looks like daylight, but in fact it's not. It's the nighttime. In this bottom left, we can see that the users sometimes engage in strange behaviors. So we talk about that in the paper. So this idea of proxemics about positioning the body and then in relation to the world and to others and the space that we navigate. So this bottom left picture shows the users crouching a bit. And they were the only two players that did that. And it was very strange because they didn't really need to do that. One of them did because they wanted to see maybe more clearly what was on the screen. He turned it over, it turned off, he turned it back over, and he thought, well, maybe I'll get very close. And then the other just followed along and did the same thing. So it was pretty funny. We were trailing behind and taking notes and kind of giggling sometimes when we'd see behaviors like this. So in terms of proxemics, Nikolai Markot has been doing some work on this and has a nice diagram, so I just lifted his diagram. But we can see this going back quite a long time, Hall, Summer, looking at these zones. So we have public zones, we have intimate zones very close to our body. We also have the orientation of the participants in an activity or in a task. And then more recently, there's been focus on facing formations, F formations, how we engage with interfaces in relation to the body. So we have, I'll show you some examples that we saw from the study. So in the game that we conducted, we had 7 dyads, and then we gave 3 game stages. So they needed to navigate to a stage, overcome a challenge, and then they could navigate to the next stage, overcome a challenge, and so on. So we made a simple narrative to help guide them in a simple way. They had to find a rocket that had crashed in the forest, they had to rebuild it, and they had to launch the rocket again. But we took that opportunity to make 3 different scenarios that forced different types of social collaboration. So A was, their goal there was to mix some chemicals, and so we had a single color on the screen, and they had to kind of match the color to the other. So they had to kind of rotate the phone. We used the IMU in the phone to then match. When it did match, then we could, they would win. They would match the correct chemical, and that would charge the battery, or that would set the battery. So that allowed for the participants to face each other and come in close proximity. The second stage, we placed that challenge on a bridge, so it had kind of a dramatic feel, kind of 3 meters down to a little stream. At night, you could kind of see the brook a little bit. You could hear it certainly. On the bridge there, then they were both commanded through the interface with large letters. It told them that they had to hold hands and jump in order to charge the battery that they had just built. So all the dyads did that. They grabbed hands and they jumped. We didn't have many couples. We only had a few couples, and mostly just friends that knew each other. They all engaged in that activity. That was quite fun. They didn't question whether the phone could sense whether they're holding hands or not. Only until after, when we did the debriefing, then they kind of laughed about it, saying, yeah, well, I guess maybe the phone doesn't know that we're holding hands, but they did, so simple suggestion and they would do this behavior. On the right, the last stage, they had to then launch the rocket. And to do that, they had to point the light from each phone into a sensor, but they were located pretty far away from each other on opposite sides of the tree. So we forced this collaboration, and they couldn't see each other directly. They had to speak. They had to kind of negotiate what should happen, where do they need to point the light, and so on. So those were the 3 stages. And the first stage, very separate. They're almost in a cocoon. They're kind of working alone. The second, we force this social collaboration, and then the third, we force collaboration, but in separate personal zones. Some interesting findings from this is that this is just one aspect of it. So one navigation method, just the glowing from the screen. We saw some behavior. One dyad started cupping, so they were using their hand to see the glow level, similar to the person that is crouching, but they just had the idea that, well, maybe I can just hold my hand and I can see now the glow level. And that's an interesting strategy. It doesn't necessarily diminish the game. We still have this very low resolution experience, so they're still navigating in the same way. And then we have crouching, so we had those that kind of bent down to see if they could to see a little bit better. And then spooning, so this is where one is in front of the other and kind of either reaching over the back, or this player was projecting by putting the phone right behind their back so they could see the glow level on their shirt. That happened once. Both A and C happened only in one situation, but we wanted to point out that is something interesting to come out of this type of a game. We have other findings related to the other navigation method and some other findings to share, but I'll be happy to answer questions about that later. So now I'd like to shift a bit and go to another situation. So I mentioned the drawing blood in a hospital setting. I presented this at the DISC conference, and it's work that did together with a lot of people, most closely with Tobias, who's a PhD student. He just graduated. He's now doing his a postdoc with Paul Marshall at UCL. So a quick overview of this. I'll show you the background of that bit of work and how we help to reduce pain and fear in the hospital, and then we'll talk about those results. So ChillFish, this idea about using a breath-based interface, Tobias and Maz Muller, they used it for ADHD. They created this kind of personal coping device where someone could, in their anxious state, they could use the breathing technique. They would encourage them to breathe in a certain pattern, and then they might calm down and continue on. So they were approached by someone, I think it was at IDC, the IDC conference, and they suggested maybe considering these other situations in the hospital, perhaps. And that seemed a pretty interesting target, but then we have some problems to deal with there. So on the bottom right, you can see what the technology involved in the old ChillFish was. It was a sensor that had a thermistor, so it would look for temperature, and a microphone. So it would hear noise from wind, and then it would measure the temperature. Was it rising or falling? And they could determine breath in or out. Very nice, but it could encourage the calm breathing pattern. It was attractive physical design, so it looked like a toy, simple. But the electronics were dirty, and we were not permitted to allow that type of a device in the hospital. So now we consider that setting. So we're trying to help children who are getting blood drawn at irregular intervals. Some children that so we had a special access to a phlebotomy clinic. Some had been there 200 times. Some had been there 5 times, and so on. But these are children that have cancer. They might have, they had 10 that have vitamin D overdose. Not all those are in our study. We don't know which children are which, but all these interesting diseases and problems, the children often develop phobias. Yeah.
Did you say vitamin D overdose?
Vitamin D overdose, yeah, and it was very strange because they had a nutritional supplement. It's not bound by the same rules as normal drugs. So there was this natural supplement. It was like 100 times the strength of the bodily intake of vitamin D. It's fat. It's stored in the fat, and so they had this brand of vitamin D supplements that in Denmark you have less vitamin D because of the sunlight, and so all these parents had children that were getting sick, and then the doctors don't really know what to do. There's some techniques to reduce vitamin D, but it's a problem, and so they don't know that those are the types of problems we were that these children would have. Yeah, it's very strange. They definitely learned a lesson from that supplements can be dangerous. So this group, it's a rather hard to reach group. They have these bad experiences where they have maybe one bad blood draw experience, and then they develop phobias, and they don't engage with it very well in the future. There are techniques to deal with this, and so here's just some analog techniques, and also that involve breath. So you can use bubbles, you can blow bubbles, and that distracts the child. You can use, you can have them blow up a balloon, you can have them blow a party blower, and so on. So that, all of those are active distraction techniques, so it requires constant effort from the child. We can also use analog passive distraction, so we could ask them to look out the window or listen to this music while we engage in this procedure. So active and passive is something, when we talk about distraction, we could consider, do we design that active distraction to encourage constant involvement, or do we just distract their attention? And in terms of those children, anything involving the bubbles, that's kind of dirty. Exerting too much, blowing a balloon isn't so healthy for them either. So now I want to show you kind of what the gold standard is for this kind of work. So Dr. Darden in New York, well, you'll see. I'd like you to pay attention though because this talk is about the body. The doctor's on the left. The mother is probably where I am taking the video. The father is holding the child with his arms, and then the child is there. This child is younger than our sample group. Our sample was 6 to 11, so those children have a awareness of their own body, and they kind of they are very sensitive to being hugged and squeezed and so on. This child is very different, but I think you'll enjoy this video. I'd like to just pay attention to how the doctor navigates this situation.
Yeah. Let's do mine. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, let's do mine. 1, 2, 3. Good. Daddy's got your arms. Whoa, we don't like this. What's that? A 1, a 2, a ready. Good. Yeah. All right. Is it a 1, a 2, a ready? Good. Yeah. Okay. Bend it. Yes, I bend it. We need tissues. All right. Let's get your Band-Aid. Hold on to that. Good. We'll get your Band-Aids. What's that? Let's get this one on. You're going to take it right off. I know you guys. Take them right off. We'll take this and good. All right. Clean up. Everybody do this here. Clean up.
So I guess you can see that his bedside manner is quite amazing, very skilled at navigating that situation, and he's doing quite a lot. So he's managing the parents, the child, distracting the child, and also just getting the job done very quickly. But that's not possible to spend that time with every patient, and it's also very difficult to have that bedside manner doesn't come with, it comes with a lot of experience and also the personality. So if we can design technologies that can even approach a little bit of that, then that would be a good thing. And we can reduce the pharmacological intervention. So no sedatives for the child, no special numbing gel, and so on. And then hopefully no phobias. So I think that little infant probably has no recollection of the scary experience. He had a good time, and he leaves the hospital without a phobia, hopefully. So in the clinic that we studied, they did have one, maybe not concentrate on the left here for a minute, maybe I should change this, but on the right, they had one analog tool in the waiting room, and it was a book from about 20 years ago, but apparently no one looks at it, and it's stuck in the bookshelf. And when we were doing the study, we asked if there were any guidance they give to parents, and then they had this book. But I love this picture because it shows, here you can basically choose, do you want to sit alone or do you want to sit with your parent? And then the next one is the magic, like, oh, you leave and everything's done and you go home. They did talk about the bee, so they did say, well, it is a sting, but you get the little sting and then you leave. But there's a lot of magic that happens in there, and it's not executed well many times. When we look at the clinic that we were engaging with, we had to surpass a few hurdles to conduct the study. So infection control, they have a researcher who's in charge of doing or of overseeing all of those new procedures before they're allowed in the hospital, and then the head of research there has to also approve any studies that take place, and then also the IRB for the university. So we couldn't conduct a very large study. We were allowed a certain number, and we also had to choose the conditions we would study. So we have the control condition is passive distraction, and then active distraction using our technique. We didn't have a no control conditions or a no intervention condition or no treatment. And that was because it is well known that these distraction techniques are helpful. So if we have a no treatment condition, then we're actually causing harm. So we recruited the 20 for ages 6 to 11. And we have this variable conditions, so some with cancer, vitamin D, and so on. Each child has their own coping strategies. Some want to look at the injection site or the venipuncture. Others want to play a video game. There were a few that had certain games that they would play to distract themselves. And others they knew which parent was the best one to sit with and to talk to. But in the wild, it's actually pretty difficult. So in that waiting room area, they have there's a lot of HCI problems everywhere here, but they have the big screen on the right has the waiting. When you tap your yellow card, it's like your health card here, I guess. It automatically shows your number and your wait time, and it tells you what room to go to. That's a lot of screen real estate with no value. But anyway, they have hospital clowns that also kind of walk around the hospital, and they kind of randomly engage with kids to hopefully brighten their mood. That's a bit strange, especially for some of the children who don't respond well to that. And it's not always clear. It's not always clear who will respond well to that or not. And we saw with our own eyes that there are some children that think it's funny, and others who don't want a clown poking them when they have cancer and they're about to get blood drawn. So.
Clowns are talking a bad rap lately.
Yeah, they have. That's right. This is a view inside the room. Oh, sorry, you'll see the kind of a sample of the video. So that's the room. That's the scary butterfly needle. Yeah, and you're scared of it. I am too. I hate my hands are sweaty when I even talk about it. So they breathe in and out. When they do that, that's the correct pattern to encourage this breathing pattern. And that breathing pattern puts them in a calm mood, and then and hopefully that's an element that helps them. This is a view of the technology we developed. So I made a new process of borrowing from Microfluidics. So it's an investment casting process, and basically 3D printed a pattern and then used silicone double shot. So used a syringe, which is kind of funny. So use a syringe and put the white in the little void, and then cast clear, and then now you can see this the pendant vein will move and follow the flow of air. So you have this food-safe module that can contact air passage, and we can autoclave it and so on. And they're pretty cheap to make, so we could throw them away if we didn't need to, if we didn't want to reuse them. So that's my contribution in the biggest contribution I made in this work was to develop this sensor, and then I helped Tobias conduct the studies. So the form factor looks pretty similar to the original that you saw before, but it's a little bit longer. So we had to make a little bit larger module that fits into the body of the ChillFish. So it became a little bit bigger, but still handheld. It's not scary for the children. It doesn't look like medical equipment. I'll go through this quickly because I guess I have 5 minutes left, maybe something like that. Okay, so I'll go through this quickly, and I'll go to maybe some more interesting pictures. So we had a 1x2 study. We had the active distraction where they watch a video, and another active distraction where they're playing the ChillFish game while they get the venipuncture. The passive distraction where they simply watch a video on the same screen. They collected data both during by watching the game logs, and then also questionnaires before and after. This is what it looks like. And to talk about the body again, in a strange way, we have this beautiful outdoor area with plants and so on, but they orient the child to face into the room where you have scary equipment, and you can see how the vials are over there on the wall, and we have the needle and so on. We decided to place the screen here. It helped to orient the the patient away from the venipuncture site, so they wouldn't concentrate on where the injection was happening. I took a few pictures of Tobias here because he couldn't present the paper. I presented this paper at DIS and wanted to kind of show how it actually worked. So when we were finished, we were taking photos, trying to show in a paper or in further diagrams. Then the technician said, well, we can just take your blood too. And he said, can you do that? And he said, that's what I do every day. And so he had to sit down and do it. And this is him, I said, oh, great, I'm not going to do it. I can take photos only. And then, I snapped a lot of photos all around. And you can see he's like, do I trust this thing? Is this going to work? And here's what it looks like. So we see the body, we see the head orientation away from the venipuncture, we see the nurse. And he's playing the game where it makes the fish go up and down. And when it was over, he was happy because it worked. That was pretty cool. But he did say it hurts. He said his one surprising thing. He said, "Ow, that actually hurts." Yeah. So he kind of validated the fact that these kids are not they're not complaining for no reason. This is just a quick pan of the inside of the room, so you can see. It does look kind of scary for a child, especially if they need a battery of tests, like 10 in a row. That's pretty scary. We conducted this questionnaires with the children and the parents, and also with the technicians, using Glass's fear scale. So that's a way that a child can easily choose or verbalize their fear, and that's a little bit. That was quite interesting. There's some research that shows that if they rate themselves a 4 or higher, then they should not have the venipuncture. They're already perhaps they have a needle phobia. We only had one child that had that self-rated that high, and in retrospect, we should have asked that they not conduct the study. But that's what they do every day. Our intervention was simply to provide the distraction. So it didn't. They would have done that anyway. But it's interesting to see that it's not the best practices that are known in the medical industry are not always followed. They kind of have a lot of liberty to make choices. So we have other scales. I'll direct you to the paper because I'd like to show you some other interesting features about the body. But we showed that the MLTs, that's the technicians, they rated as being more effective than having the passive distraction. So using the fish, using this game where it was involved breath, it was significant difference seen. The parents also reported less pain than expected. So we had some interesting examples where the one mother said, "Wow, you didn't even cry this time," and that was pretty cool. So that was nice to see. I would hate to have repeated venipuncture, and I guess some kids do cry every time. In the future, we'd like to go further with a larger study. So the next, what we plan to do is a 90-patient study where we do qualitative comparisons between a few different techniques of the game, changing the game a bit, the on-screen game, and then 450 children to do 3 1 by 3. We'll see when that starts, but that's the plan. Some interesting things to mention, that even when we have this passive distraction, that the nurses and the children and the parents often turn it into active distraction. They kind of challenge each other, and they say, if they're supposed to watch a video, they start commenting about the video, saying, "Oh, can you see what is over there? Can you tell me if you see the yellowfish? Can you tell me if?" So this coping strategy is something that we use it as a standard technique, and the bedside manner of the technician should do such. They're very acute senses to what the children need. We found a few patient types. These are also reflected in the literature. And that distraction is not necessarily good for all children. Some are beyond help. They simply are, they're not going to calm down. They know what is in store for them, and this distraction, no matter what, will not help them. And they perhaps need sedation, as many of them did. Yeah, so that's an interesting finding, is that it doesn't work for everybody, and that, I guess, it kind of makes sense in retrospect. Some children actually like to watch the venipuncture occur. They want to see the needle go in. In terms of the body, we could think of this as soft physical restraint, so like fuzzy handcuffs. So the child, they're there in the hospital all day. and they're poked and prodded and they're told what to do. And this is one opportunity where they get to choose what they want to do. So we ask them, do you want to play the game? And they say yes, of course. But they feel maybe as if they have a little bit of choice. So then they're kind of offering over the handcuffs or offering their wrists for the handcuffs. And then we have some other things that work differently as well. So in terms of the parents, previously when the parent is with the child, sometimes the parent is sitting with the child on the lap or right next to them on the chair, and they might be with their arm around them or with their arm on the shoulder, and as the needle approaches the arm, they start squeezing the child, and that is an impact intimate space on the child, or they might even verbalize and say, wow, that's a big needle. And if your mom says that and you're about to get an injection, then it's scary. So we saw the parents influence it quite a bit. We also have, in terms of body position, by orienting the head away from the venipuncture site, that encourages the child not to concentrate on the injection or the venipuncture. But we also do something to the body which is a little bit strange. We occupy the mouth so they can't really scream. They could, if they stopped playing the game, they could scream, but then they are so interested in the game, it's very simple, but they instead of pulling it out of their mouth and screaming, they just play the game and they power through it. So that's kind of an interesting artifact of that. And perhaps that's why blowing balloons or blowing party blowers works as well, because it's an activity where they have a small challenge they can engage with that small challenge, and there's the reward that is immediate. So in the paper you'll see a lot of diagrams. I'd like to just point out this one, which is maybe you were kind of wincing about the needles. When I realized that to make this pattern, I had to use a hypodermic needle to inject the white opaque silicone in the pattern. It was terrible. I had to go and buy syringes and use syringes, and it was terrible. It was, but it was the only way that it could make this system work, and so I have a love-hate relationship with this stuff. But I'd encourage you to look at some of this work. This isn't my work, but just in terms of making the sensor. So Microfluidics, they're making these tiny microfluidic devices. We use the same process. So we just cast ABS plastic and then use acetone to eat away the plastic. And then you have this, in this case they made a flask with a little stirring device in there. And this is 2 millimeters across, so that's really, really small pieces. Oh, yeah, you can look at that video. But what I like about that sensor is that it's really just materials and geometry, and you're seeing more work along those lines. So that's it for that work. And if I tie back, I think in both these examples we see small interventions that perhaps challenge the body position, the position to each other, and I would encourage that we look at that more in HCI, that we don't make these drastic changes, but perhaps look at tuning the space. Great, thank you.